together and go over this lesson because it's always find it very enlightening. I always like to always have the ability to reflect on what the lesson is talking about, and then how I can apply it to my life. And so I hope that is the outcome of today's lesson is that you get something that you can that provide you some type of reflection, and then also give you some goals in life to how to make your life better. So, well, that's a deep subject. That is the title. And today's background passage comes from Jeremiah, which is the topic was the coverage of this lesson was very large. And so we'll see information coming from Jeremiah, the 20th chapter, 1st through 6th verse, 37th chapter of Jeremiah, 1st through 38th verse, the 28th verse, and then the 43rd verse, verses 1 through 7. However, the lesson actually centers around Jeremiah, the 38th chapter, 7 and 13. And I'm going to break it down into three parts, this lesson into three parts. The first part is the courage advocacy for God's prophet, wisdom in the righteous action, and then I'm going to finish up with compassion in deliverance. And before we get started, I just want to I have one vocabulary word just because I didn't know what it meant, and I'm not trying to insult anybody's intelligence, but I didn't know, so I just thought maybe y'all didn't know either. But the word is cistern. And that is a big hole about 3 yards wide, 5 yards deep. It's carved out of natural rock or converted from a cave formation. And it can be lined with plaster to hold water, and it can be used to store grain or food. But in this case, in our lesson, it's going to serve as a prison or a holding pit, which is important. And hence the topic, well, that's a deep subject. So it's not just the information is deep, but the cistern is deep. Now, our unifying principle deals with the aspect of thinking about when we stand for something and we think we have the backing of those around us, and we find ourselves standing alone by ourselves because we're thinking we have that support. And the lesson today is designed to show that Jeremiah was wrongfully cast into the cistern for speaking God's truth. And though it puts him in danger, God used Ebed-Melech to intercede with King Zedekiah and bring about Jeremiah's release. And I hope that, once again, that this lesson, as far as what you can take away and use in your life, is to show you that we may be done wrong for speaking the truth to the power. But we must know that since our God is sovereign, God will send one to deliver us from the hurt and harm from our enemies. And that's the goal. That's what I want you to take away from this. And so before we get started, I got some questions for you to think about. And you don't have to raise your hand or speak out or whatever. You can just think about your answer internally. So have you ever been wrongly done? Mistreated for what you consider as doing right? Have you done what was right even when you knew you will be singled out? You will be the oddball out. Are you able to withstand the pressures of the world and maintain your stance, especially when the repercussions can cause you mental and physical anguish? So these questions, if you can relate to these questions, then today's lesson is about you. So today's lesson comes from the book of Jeremiah, which was written by the prophet Jeremiah, and who we learned in our Bible study that is, he was considered the weeping prophet due to his sorrow nature of his messages and powerful personal sufferings, and his boldly declaring that his word was from God. And it details how the people of Judah and Israel drifted away from God. So in this lesson, it just, we jump right into this lesson and we see right off the bat that Jeremiah is in prison and thrown into the cistern because of four influential officials. That's how the lesson describes it. Four influential officials. And their names are Shephatiah, Gedaliah, Jehukum, and Pashur. Now, it'll probably be the last time that I mention those names because it's very difficult to pronounce. So, but you know, they were angered about how Jeremiah prophesied how those remaining in Jerusalem would die and be affected by famine and the plague. So Jeremiah made these prophecies about this due to the idolatry, the injustice, and the covenant breaking away by the people of the kingdom of Judah. So because of this, because of Jeremiah's harsh message, those officials asked King Zedekiah to kill Jeremiah. They asked him to kill him. Now that's something to think about. You know, the influence others may have over another individual, such as a king, to warrant the death of another person based off a simple message of what this person is talking about. Now, the other day, Rachel and I was watching this TV show just to talk about how people can be influenced. And we was watching Martin. I don't know if y'all remember the sitcom, Martin Lawrence, Tisha Campbell, and some other folks. But anyway, in the episode, it was dealing with Martin and Gina's relationship. And Martin was like, hey, you know, I'm still the same. But he had two buddies, Cole and Tommy, telling him, oh, Martin, you done got soft. You know? And so there was this chiming in his ear. And what that did, it caused Martin to react, to revert back to his old ways and cause hardship between him and Gina. You know, eventually Martin found his ways and straightened back up, and him and Gina resolved their issues and got back right. But it just goes to show you just how powerful people can be just by their words. And if that doesn't break it down to you, think about this. For those of you that play spades and dominoes, you know, you sit there and you got your dominoes and you got your cards, and you got people looking over you. Like, I'll play that one. You know, play that big six. Oh, you got them fives, run the fives, you know. I'll play that, you know, play that ace. And you know not to do that. But because they're so, you think they know what they're talking about, you do it, and you still lose. You know? Those individuals have that power over you, that influence over you. So I wonder, you know, how could these folks be so powerful to influence King Zedekiah? I mean, he was the king, you know, so he was in charge. But these individuals were influenced, and they were influenced based on four factors, four areas of power needed to be king during that time. First, those individuals had political power. So they had the power to charge the king with treason. Second, they had military influence. And they could claim that Jeremiah's words were threatening and weakening the morale of the soldiers. And they framed this to make Jeremiah seem like he was a threat to national security. And the third was economic control. Those four individuals own land and they own the resources of that area. And lastly, they had a foreign alliance that clashed with Jeremiah's message. And you put all those things together and you get the makeup to push the king to kill Jeremiah. Now what's interesting is that Zedekiah knew Jeremiah spoke the truth from God. He knew it. But his fear of man outweighed the fear of God. We find ourselves in those situations a lot, even today. And because of that fear, the king consented to Jeremiah being thrown in the cistern. And this cistern here had no water, and it was only mud. And so they took Jeremiah and they lured him in with ropes into the cisterns full of mud. And those ropes suggest how deep. They just didn't place him in. He didn't walk in. They lured him down with the ropes to show how deep the cistern was. You know. And so it's kind of crazy to think about the realization of what takes place in the world today. Now we, even as Christians, as God's children, will fear what man has to say, even though we know what God commanded. We have a living Bible, a bona fide document that tells us how we should walk, how we should talk, and how we should carry ourselves. Will we allow what man says to determine how we treat one another? And there's so many examples going on present day right now that we could talk about. You know, and it's funny because it's not just the non-believers. You know, we have people that come in these four walls that we call the church right now and make us question how we should live our lives. You know, make us question whether or not to follow God or give into the worldly pressures based on politics or economy or popularity. And so as we get back to the lesson, we see Jeremiah, now he's in the mud. And he's probably going to die because, you know, he's in there, he's struggling, he's going to either die by starvation or suffocation because he's going to continue to sink into the mud. But that wasn't the end of the story. You see, there was this royal servant, somebody that was loyal within those that inner circle. You know, a Cushite descendant, and he had King Zedekiah's ear, meaning that he was a trusted agent. And these individuals, these royal servants, they were called Ebed-Melech. You know. And just a little known fact about these royal servants, you know, they're Cushites, they're dark-skinned individuals from the Sudan area. They were typically castrated, so as not to create dynasties within the king's harem. But they were considered very loyal and very obedient to the king. Now, I share this with you because the Ebed-Melech went to King Zedekiah because he heard about the situation with Jeremiah. And he went to the king and he boldly partitioned for Jeremiah's rescue. He boldly. So that just of concern and emphasis that was placed on the request from the royal servant was so profound that King Zedekiah, based on the request from the Ebed-Melech, went and decided to rescue Jeremiah from the cistern. Now in verse 10 of the 38th verse of Jeremiah it says, "Then the king commanded Ebed-Melech the Ethiopian, saying, Take from hence 30 men with thee, and take up Jeremiah the prophet out of the dungeon before he died." Now, nowhere in the scripture does it discuss how long that it took from them putting Jeremiah into the cistern to the Ebed-Melech talking to King Zedekiah, to him saying, go ahead and release him. But I want to stress the importance of it took one person, one man, to convince the king to change his mind, to have the moral courage to stand up for what was right. Now, this action quickly demonstrated the power of God and how God can just turn around any situation. Remember, King Zedekiah was pressured by those four influential individuals to make the decision to kill Jeremiah. Four and then one, a servant. God spoke through a servant to change King Zedekiah's mind to rescue Jeremiah. Now, in the verse I said, it took King Zedekiah instructed 30 men. Not 2, not 6, not 12, but 30 men to go and rescue Jeremiah from the cistern. So why 30? Why was that number important? The command to take 30 men may seem excessive for rescuing one man from the cistern, but it demonstrates the king's commitment to the rescue. He wanted to ensure that nothing was going to stop Jeremiah from being rescued out of the cistern. The king wanted to ensure he had the adequate amount of manpower for the challenge of safely extracting Jeremiah. In addition, the king wanted to ensure that the royal servant would not run into any interference from the enemies of Jeremiah. Now remember in verse 10, I said that the king said before he died. And it was important to realize he said that because he wanted to illustrate how much danger Jeremiah was in and the importance of extracting him out of the cistern. Now remember that a cistern, it contained no water. So it wasn't like he was treading water in it. He was in mud. And so the chances are it was kind of like a quicksand effect that either he was going to sink down and suffocate or die of starvation. Now based on those facts, we can come to the conclusion that the extraction needed to happen quickly based on the request. However, the royal servant, the Ebed-Melech, took a moment to gather his thoughts and devise a plan, not as to cause harm to Jeremiah as he was being retrieved out of the cistern. And verse 11 says, so the Ebed-Melech took the men with him, and he went into the house of the king under the treasury, and took thence old cast clouts and old rotten rags, and then let them down by cords into the dungeon to Jeremiah. So this is important to note. So the Ebed-Melech took these soft fabrics to cushion the ropes that was previously used to let him down, and he wrapped them with these soft cloths to prevent Jeremiah from being cut as he was being pulled out of the mud. And there's some importance to that. So the Ebed-Melech understood the situation as a whole. He knew time was important. It was that of the essence. But more importantly, he wanted to consider the safe removal of Jeremiah. All this is to say the rescue had to be led to be careful. It had to be methodical. That process had to go without causing Jeremiah any additional harm. You see, God often works through simple means sometimes, and practical wisdom. And this should be a reminder to all of us that when God calls upon us to help others, we should approach their needs thoughtfully and thoroughly, considering how to accomplish a just end in a manner that preserves human dignity and prevents additional harm. See, the royal servant, he wasn't doing it for clout. He didn't go for fame. He did it because it was Jeremiah. He needed his help, and he stood for what was right. He went against those four powerful individuals to convince the king that, hey, you knew you was wrong. Let's do something about it. And sometimes, our intentions are good. And we want to help somebody. But then we decide that we want to do it on our terms. I'm going to help you, but you're not, I've been helping you. but you're not healed yet. And I'll be honest with you, I've had that problem. You know, I'm willing to help anybody, but then I'll go back and be like, you know what, man, you're not healed yet? You know, you're not, I mean, I'm giving you all these resources, I'm helping you, spending time with you. But the one thing I keep forgetting as a Christian is that sometimes the individual may not be ready to receive it the way I want to give it to them. Therefore, I have to develop that patience. And that's what I have learned over the years, is that sometimes it's not on my timeline. You know, we've got to look at the person that we're helping and help them on their timeline. And so, we're going to finish up the lesson by looking how the Abimelech instructed Jeremiah to prepare for the extraction out of the cistern. You know, like I said earlier, I mean, when folks are weakened through the trials of life, you know, we have to carefully approach to help them. You know, we got to know how to lead them out of the bad situation. Instruct them so not to cause further damage, but in ways that we know our attempts are to help and not hinder or cause additional harm. And this is what we see in that royal service. You know, as he instructed Jeremiah to take the soft cloth and wrap around his body to be removed from the cistern. Because, you know, he could have said, hey, put that rope on that wasn't soft, pull them out and cause additional harm. But the servant said, you know what, let me think about this. I know you got to move at a hasty pace, but if we move it too fast, then we might cause a harm. And I go back to what I said earlier about helping. We as Christians, when we go to help folks, we can't be so too quick to have somebody move or help them at our pace. We've got to be able to recognize their pace, so it's not to cause any further harm or any setbacks. Now Jeremiah sees the effort of the Abimelech, and now he trusts them. There is trust. The trust is reestablished between the servant and the prophet. And there's this connection that grows. And it grows through ethnic and culturally, you know. And this shows a couple of things, you know, in the big picture. God's faithfulness to preserve his servant. And the effort of multiple groups of people working together to accomplish God's purpose. And I just really, really want to stress how this lesson, I hope you understand what I'm getting at with us as church members, as people of God, people that when we say we're going to walk with God, that we understand what God's instructions are to help one another. And I really can't stress the importance of saying, hey, you know, just because you have the means and it's good to help, you've got to know how to help. And at what pace to help. Because if you don't help in the right way, once again, you might cause that person or those individuals additional harm. Now, Jeremiah's suffering for faithfully delivering God's message is a powerful example for believers today. Like Jeremiah, we may face opposition for speaking the truth, and we may feel alone in the adversity. God promises to be with us, guiding us and ensuring our labor is not in vain. Even in hardship, our faithfulness is a testimony to God's presence and provisions. And so I say this, I hope that this lesson provides motivation for you. For you to go out, to help those that can't help themselves, but also understand how you help them, the manner that you help them, and not causing those individuals additional harm, or hurting them till they don't want your help, because you think that you know what you know. So I want you to go out and stand for what is right in the eyes of God. Withstand the evils of men. And trust that God will